Having a tutor can be great for learning Chinese, but how much progress you make depends as much as you as on the tutor. Come prepared, stay engaged, and make the most of each session. Hello and welcome to the Hacking Chinese podcast. In this week's episode, we are going to talk about tutors, and more precisely, what you should do to get the most out of your tutoring sessions. Before we dive into that though, I'd like to mention that I have been experimenting with Notebook LM to generate audio overviews in Chinese for the articles that I write. And if you want to hear what that sounds like, I've included the audio at the end of this episode. So let's talk about tutors. I often talk about the importance of being an independent student, meaning that you make the important decisions and you are responsible for them. The first is not a given. Sometimes other people make decisions for you, but you still need to be aware of these decisions and what consequences they have for you. Because regardless who makes the decisions, you are the one who's going to live with them later. For example, if you enroll in a course that skips something important and you realize that a year from now, well, you can always blame your teacher, the curriculum designer, or somebody else, but the one who ends up with lacking Chinese is you, not the teacher or the curriculum designer. And this is why you shouldn't outsource too many important decisions to such people, or at least when you do, you should be aware that you're doing it. This is something I've covered in numerous articles and episodes already, so I'll leave links in the show notes. Being an independent learner, however, doesn't mean that you should learn Chinese in isolation. Languages are fundamentally social in nature, and so communication is both a method and a goal of language learning. It's true that you can learn a lot by listening and reading on your own, but some things are better learned or maybe only learned in interaction with other people. You can interact with anyone who speaks Chinese, perhaps a native speaker, perhaps a non-native speaker, or perhaps it's a teacher or somebody else who is professionally obliged to help you, or perhaps it's just someone being nice or somebody who wants to talk to you for some other reason. In this episode, we're talking about tutors, but most of what I say will also be applicable to interactions with other people, although some things are of course different. A big difference is that when you talk to a friend, you can't really demand that much. Sure, you can ask nicely, but if you hire someone, you can expect them to do what you hire them to do, and if they don't, you need to hire someone else. I'm primarily interested in tutors or private teachers who teach Chinese to either individuals or a very small group. Being a classroom teacher is a little bit different because there are so many students and the teacher can't be expected to cater to each individual to the same extent that they can when there's only one or maybe two or three students. And there might also be a curriculum that this teacher has to stick to, and that also limits their ability to adapt to you and your learning situation. So tutors or private language teachers it is. The question that I want to explore here is how to get the most out of your tutoring sessions. There are two sides to this question, you and the teacher. So in this week's episode, we're going to talk about what you can do and what you can bring as a student to get the most out of your tutoring sessions. Then in a follow-up article, we're going to explore the tutor's side of the equation and see, among other things, what you should look for in a great tutor. So the first and most important thing when you hire a tutor to help you learn Chinese is to know what you want. Why are you learning Chinese? And more particularly, what are you hiring this tutor to help you with? This ought to be obvious, but in my experience, most students don't actually know exactly what they want with a tutor or what their specific goals are. And if you don't know what your goals are, you can't really expect your tutor to know, and so they can't adapt to that either. This issue is easily solved, however. Just think about why you are learning Chinese, maybe think of some long-term goals, and then think of some shorter-term goals that you might need to pass or reach before getting to your long-term goal. So write these down and do so in can-do statements. So these are things that you want to be able to do in Chinese but can't currently do. So here are some examples. I want to be able to introduce myself in an easy-to-understand manner. I want to be able to explain my job to someone who doesn't know what it's about. I want to be able to effectively tell someone about something I've read and make them think that it sounds interesting. I want to be able to present ideas convincingly and eloquently. These are of course just examples, and as you could probably tell, of increasing difficulty. If you want much more inspiration and ideas for what kinds of statements you could use, you can check the can-do statements in the Central European Framework of Reference for Languages, and I'll put a link in the show notes. I think it's great to be clear about why you are learning Chinese and what you want to achieve, both in the long term and short term. But this is not enough here. You also need to communicate this to your tutor, and that's of course why it's useful to also write it down. Not all tutors can adapt to your learning situation and your expressed needs and goals, but if you don't tell them, they don't even theoretically have a chance of adapting to them. The more specific your goal is, the more important it is that you're upfront with this with your tutor. So for example, if somebody asked me about coaching or tutoring them when it comes to pronunciation, I would happily say yes, because that's something I feel confident doing. But if somebody asked me about tutoring them when it comes to classical Chinese, I would probably pass, because I don't think that's something I'm uniquely well suited to do. Like I said, not all tutors are good at everything, and being upfront with what you want makes it much more likely that you will find the right tutor. This is not only about matching skills, but it's also about attitude, personality, teaching style, etc. For example, if you are a beginner and want to develop your spoken Mandarin, you just want to find a tutor who's good at talking to you in Chinese you can understand, without needing to resort to English too much, and somebody who's maybe a bit encouraging, and so on. But if you're not aware of this yourself or don't tell your tutor, you will most likely end up with lessons focusing on a text where the tutor explains the words, the grammar, and so on, and this is not what you need as a beginner. So communicating what you expect and what you want to improve with your tutor upfront is important, but it is as important that you keep this dialogue going. Maybe you don't need to allocate time talking about the tutoring sessions themselves and what's good and what can be improved and so on every single time you meet, but at least do so regularly. If nothing else, this is a good reminder for your tutor what you're after. So for example, if you want someone to nitpick your pronunciation, it's likely that they will try to do that the first session, maybe the second session, but then they'll probably forget about it and you'll get fewer and fewer corrections. So if that's really what you want, you need to remind them and talk about this quite often. It's worth noting here that many teachers have a teaching style which they will default to if they don't spend any extra effort. This means that even if they can cater to your specific requirements with some extra effort, they might gravitate back to that old teaching style if they don't pay attention, and that might not be what you want. Naturally, if the gap between what your teacher is currently doing and what you want them to do is too big, you might be better off finding a new tutor, but that's something we're going to talk about in the next part in this series. Next, we're going to talk about a few things that you can do as a student, and I think these might be a little bit more self-explanatory, but if you're a good student, you're going to get more out of your sessions. There are many ways you can be a good student. For example, if you preview properly, you will get more out of the sessions, and if you review afterwards, you will also get more out of it. This is partly related to something I call time quality, so that is essentially about doing the right thing at the right time. So if you're going to discuss a text with a tutor, and that's what you've hired them to do, if you haven't read the text properly in advance, meaning that you haven't previewed, you will spend a lot of the time in class trying to figure out what words mean, the basic meaning of the text, etc. But that was not actually the goal. The goal was to talk about it, and so you need to preview, or you will waste lots of time with your tutor doing things you could equally well have done on your own. Likewise, if you don't review after the sessions, you risk forgetting many of the things that you actually did learn during the session. There are, of course, many things you can do to be a good student, but I want to mention one more before we wrap this up, and that is to adopt a positive attitude, so stay engaged and curious. This can make a big difference for how you feel about the lessons, but also what your tutor thinks about you, which will, even if they are a highly trained professional, influence how they deal with you. If you engage wholeheartedly in the activities that they suggest and then evaluate them afterwards, they are much more likely to take you seriously and put in that extra effort. Or you're just both more likely to enjoy the tutoring sessions, and that matters. So, to conclude, if you want the most value for your time and money, try to bring your best to each tutoring session. You can't directly control what your tutor does or how they do it, but you can control what you do, so start there. If you do your best, it's more likely that your tutor will too. As promised in the introduction, I will now include an audio overview of my article about how to get the most out of your tutoring sessions. It was generated by Google's Notebook LM, which can create audio overviews in a kind of podcast style for free, and so this is what it generated when I gave it my article. If you have any thoughts or comments about this audio snippet, or indeed anything else in this episode, feel free to reach out to me at editor@hackingchinese.com or leave a comment on your favorite platform.
欢迎收听，今天我们来聊聊怎么让你上的中文辅导课，效果最大化。我们参考了一份学习指南，叫《精通中文家教学员指南》。这次探讨的核心呢，可能跟你想的不太一样。关键也许不是找个多完美的老师，而是你作为学生怎么主导这个学习过程。
没错，完全是这样。这份指南的核心思想就是让你从一个等着老师喂知识的学生，变成一个主动学习的掌舵人。语言学习嘛，确实需要互动，但说到底，方向盘还是得握在你自己手里。
好，那咱们从哪儿说起呢？指南第一个就强调要明确你自己的目标。我猜很多人可能就跟我以前一样，只会说我想提高口语，但指南说了，这样太空泛了。
是的，目标一定要具体，越具体越好。模糊的目标，你怎么知道自己到了没到呢？怎么知道往哪儿使劲呢？关键就是你得想想，你想用中文具体干点啥。比如说口语吧，你想完成哪个具体的说话任务，现在是什么卡住了你？这才是上课了解决的问题。
那个指南里头啊，他提了个挺好的法子，就是写下来，把你想做但现在还做不到的事情写下来，不一定都是特宏伟的目标，最好有些短期的能看见效果的。
对，
比如能不能清楚地做个自我介绍，让人家一下子记住你。
或者跟不懂行的人，你能说明白你个工作是干嘛的吗？再比如，能不能把你刚看过的有意思的东西绘声绘色地讲给别人听？
还有，能不能在讨论的时候有条理、有说服力地表达自己的观点？这些都是很具体的目标。
行，目标清楚了，但这光自己知道好像还不够啊，怎么让老师也明白？而且，愿意配合呢？毕竟老师可能有自己一套教学习惯。
对，就到关键的第二步了，沟通。你得知道，不同的老师专长不一样，风格也千差万别。如果你有个特别具体的需求，比如说，我就想练某个行业的词儿，或者某个特别绕的语法点，那你一定得，一开始就跟老师讲清楚。
啊，明白了。所以要看自己的需求去找匹配的老师，或者让老师知道怎么匹配你。是的，比如初学者可能更需要一个能放慢语速、多用中文跟你聊天的老师，这样能创造那种可理解输入的环境。就是说，你在大部分能听懂的情况下，自然而然地吸收语言，而不是觉得，完全跟不上，很挫败。
那要是水平高一点呢？
那可能要求就不一样了。高级学习者也许需要的是能帮你抠发音细节，或者跟你深入讨论复杂话题的老师。这就不光是技能匹配了，教学方法是不是对你的路子也很重要。
明白了。所以说，沟通不是一次性的事儿，得一直进行。那接下来就是反馈了吧？给老师提意见会不会有点尴尬？指南有啥好建议没？
指南确实特别强调持续沟通和反馈，你得把它看成是一种对话，为了大家共同的目标，而不是去指责老师。目的是建立一个稳固的合作性的关系，确保这个课一直是朝着对你最有用的方向走的。
有道理。
当然了，也得意识到老师们可能有自己习惯的一套教学模式，想让他们改变，可能需要点时间和耐心。所以定期坐下来一起看看进展，调整方向，这个非常必要，能避免那种学了半天好像没啥进步的感觉。
有道理。那除了跟老师互动，我们自己还能做点啥？毕竟学习最终还是自己的事儿嘛。
对，这块指南也提了，主要是关于时间利用效率的问题。核心建议就是， 那些你能自己提前搞定的准备工作，比如预习个生词啊，了解点背景知识啊，就别占用宝贵的上课时间了。
把好钢用在刀刃上。
就是这个意思，把跟老师在一起的时间用在那些必须得有老师带着、有互动才能完成的事儿上，比如对话练习、发音纠正，或者解答你实在搞不懂的难点。
对对对，还有态度。指南里说要积极投入，保持好奇。就是说，老师建议搞个什么活动，就算你心里有点嘀咕，也最好认真试试看。
对，这个其实最终是在帮你自个儿。你想想，一个积极配合、对啥都挺好奇的学生，老师教起来也带劲儿，对吧？老师也更能把精力放到真正对你有价值的教学点上。你让老师的工作顺畅了，老师就能更好地帮你达成你的学习目标，这是双赢的事儿。
好的，那我们来快速小结一下。要想从中文辅导里收获最多，关键在于，你得主动起来。首先，目标得定得特别具体。其次，要跟老师清清楚楚地沟通你的需求和期望。
对。
接着呢，要持续地给反馈，一起调整方向。最后，自己也要给力，做好预习复习，用开放积极的态度去上课。可以说，学习效果很大程度上是你自己说了算。
没错，你这边使出全力了，老师那边也更可能被你带动起来，发挥出最大潜力。核心就是从一个被动的等着接东西的人，变成一个学习的主导者，把辅导老师看作是一个由你来引导的宝贵资源，主动去挖掘、去利用。
最后，留给大家一个问题思考一下：既然指南提到老师有他们默认的教学风格，那反过来想想，你自己的学习风格偏好是怎样的？你了解自己喜欢怎么学、怎么吸收最快吗？你又能多清楚地把这些偏好告诉你的老师，来争取一个真正为你量身定制的辅导体验呢？
Thank you for tuning in to the Hacking Chinese podcast. If you like this episode, please share it. More information and inspiration about learning and teaching Chinese can be found at hackingchinese.com. See you in the next episode, and until then, good luck with your studies.